This is the eLearn podcast, episode 83.
I think the intentional is right. I think that's the key. What happens a lot of times, and part of the reason virtual learning gets a bad rap is because there's poor design and poor execution. It's usually not the technology that they're using that's the problem. It's almost always the strategy and the solutions that were designed by people.
Welcome to the eLearn podcast. My name's Laddick, and I'm your host from OpenLMS. My guest for today is Ben Lowell, who works on strategy for Class, a new learning management system or platform from the founder of Blackboard that works on top of Zoom and is built using the Zoom SDK or software development kit. In this energizing conversation, Ben and I talk about the virtues, benefits, and pitfalls of both online learning and in-person learning, and when it's a good idea to use them or not. Hint, there's no one right answer, and Ben walks us through an example of success from the Utah Jazz. We also talk about why in-person delivery is important for socialization and the fact that adults are actually more difficult to train as opposed to kids because they have experience and perspectives they bring to the table. We also talk about the importance of learning constructs and pacing and how we're more likely to have aha moments in groups and why hands-on experience is critical, whether you're fixing cars or leading teams. Ben and I also talk about why online learning often gets a bad rap because of poor design by humans. And it's rarely the tech. Rather, it's almost always the strategy and the solutions that were designed by people. We also talk about why you should never ask the question whether virtual or in-person delivery is better, because the better question is, what's the best strategy for delivering this content that you have right now? And then finally, Ben and I talk about why you should still have in-person events, but you need to use them for all the reasons other than training, and why training, just like eating, is all about a balanced diet. But before we get started, a quick word from our sponsors.
The eLearning podcast is sponsored by the eLearn Success Series, a uniquely valuable set of events that bring together sector experts and thought leaders to offer solutions to the most critical challenges and issues at the intersection of education and technology. Get your free ticket to all 4 sessions at elearnsuccessseries.com. And OpenLMS, a company that provides world-class LMS solutions that empower organizations to meet education and workplace learning needs. Learn more by visiting openlms.net.
Hello, Ben. Welcome to the eLearning podcast. How are you today?
Doing well. Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. I am, as everyone knows, still sitting in Mexico City, which is lovely here at the, we're kind of at the top of February still. It's February 9th. So I feel like we're looking at spring already, which is very exciting for us. But where do we find you sitting?
I'm just north of Salt Lake City in a town called Layton. I just returned home from a conference in Atlanta. It wasn't like super warm in Atlanta, but it was definitely warmer than Salt Lake. And I guarantee Mexico City is much warmer than Salt Lake at the moment. So I'm jealous. And I'd love to practice my Spanish. So
okay. Entonces, está bien. No, I'm just playing. And I would embarrass myself as hard as I work at it. I would embarrass myself. Ben, you work on strategy for a company called Class, which I've been super intrigued about for a while, and I discovered it probably 8 months ago, if I'm completely honest. But I would really like for you to explain not only what you do, but also tell us about what Class is in your own words, because it's a technology that works directly with or on top of Zoom. And I know that's going to blow a lot of people's minds about how to turn Zoom into a classroom kind of thing. So give us the 60 seconds on that.
Definitely. So you said you've only heard it for 8 months. I've only heard about it for 12 months. I've been there for a year. The company is very new. Company it was born out of COVID. Our founder, Michael Chasen, was the founder of Blackboard many, many years ago. Not to make him, date him, but yeah, he's been around a while. And his kids were experiencing virtual learning in the classroom via COVID and all via Teams and Zoom. And he said, there's got to be a better way to do this. And so he came up with this concept for Class, which was essentially a virtual classroom that works with Zoom. And he approached Zoom and asked those people, you should build it. He has some connections, with some of the founders of Zoom. And they said, why don't you build it to our platform? And so Zoom has what they've referred to an SDK, a software development kit, and they're part of their business strategy. I don't want to speak for Zoom, but part of their business strategy is to get companies to build tools that fit and work with or on top of Zoom. And so we were one of the first to do that. Class is a platform that is built on Zoom's SDK, so it requires Zoom to use. But we've created virtual facilitation teaching tools on top of and within the Zoom environment using our own platform. So the integration is pretty seamless. It feels like you're in a Zoom, but like Zoom enhanced, and Zoom for teachers.
I was just going to say, does it have
does
it have just like a dashboard on the side or buttons on the side or something where you got these other tools and just additional functionality essentially?
Exactly. Yeah. We have assignments. You can build out learning activities, quizzes, surveys, in addition to your polling. And then, engaging your audience is always an important part, and virtual learning, it makes it more difficult. And so we've created ways for a facilitator to track the engagement level of learners throughout a session and in the live session, and then have data on the back end to support and help them see trends in facilitation and attention and engagement throughout all your sessions.
Super
and
cool.
So, it's, today in a Zoom or Teams world, like a lot of what we do is just stare at somebody sharing their screen and walk us through something. And it's not very engaging for the learner. We just kind of sit and stare. But if there's more conversation happening in the chat, more conversation happening verbally out loud, and we have tools that are built in. So I'm clicking on a document as opposed to just watching you share your screen, or we need to go to a website. Now we're all in the website using it, or a video playback is better. So anyways, we've just tried to make that experience 10 times better, and hopefully closing the gap between the virtual and the physical space.
Cool. Well, let's dive in right there, the virtual and the physical space, because we know it's a hybrid world now. Right. Exactly. Even though there's a lot of COVID fatigue out there, it feels like things are opening up, and it feels like there's a general consensus that we're going in a good direction. Right.
Yeah.
But schools are still closing, or offices closed, that, remote workers have a lot of power, and so this evolution of both the school and the workplace are a real thing.
Sure.
When do we use in-person learning, and when do we use virtual learning, and what are the benefits of either, from your perspective as someone who's, you're going to, like I do, we sit in the e-learning space. What do you do to a prospective client? What do you say to them? It's like, hey, you should probably do this in person or that virtual. Like, what are those different benefits and whatnot?
No, it's a great question. I don't know that there's always a right answer to when you do one or the other. What I like is that an organization that has the ability to do multiple learning modalities, and they decide what are the reasons, what are the purposes, what's the intent of this particular training. And based on that, they can design a learning experience that suits that intent or the outcomes they're trying to drive. And so, because we have technology today, you have the option of doing self-paced learning, right? So you can do asynchronous training. For example, if I'm just trying to communicate a policy, I used to work for the Utah Jazz, and I was working in training and development, right? And I remember a very specific instance. The legal counsel received a new memo from the NBA that said, basically, the NBA teams and staff and anybody who works for these teams there's a restriction on their ability to participate in fantasy sports, right? Specifically, basketball, right?
Because there's money involved, there's gambling,
conflict of interest, right? Mm-hmm. So they were trying to say, hey, this is a new policy. And what happened was there was an email the legal counsel sent to the entire staff that said, here's the policy. And I pulled up the policy and I read through it, and it basically, here's all the things you can't do. And by the way, if you do this, you could be fired. Have a good day. I'm not exaggerating, obviously. They're very capable, that team and the staff. But I was in training and development, and I thought, what would be helpful is, why don't we make a training out of this policy? Mm-hmm. So I built a little mini video that was 2-3 minutes long that explained the policy and the main components of the policy. And instead of just sending the email with this communicative piece, we sent out a training. Everybody could consume it. And I sent it out in an LMS, and everybody could track who had watched it, who had seen it. And then I built a 5-question quiz at the end to see like, okay, do you really understand the main points of this? And I asked legal counsel if we could do this. He said, yeah, that'd be a great idea. And, within 2 weeks, we had like 95% compliance that people had read the policy, they had understood the policy, and they agreed to the policy, right? As opposed to just sending an email. So I like to analyze every outcome before, like, what do you want people to do with this information? And based on that, let's build an experience around that. So if I were to do a follow-up on that, I could have said, we could sit everybody down in a room and have everybody live in person in the arena, right? And explain this policy. But in that situation, I felt like, well, everybody could watch this and learn the basics of this policy in 3 minutes on their own. And we have tracking capability. So I didn't feel like in-person was necessary. If there was a situation where we should be discussing it as a group, for instance, a leadership team or ethics committee, let's discuss the policy. Here's the policy, and let's discuss why it's important and how it impacts our business. Then I would want a group of people.
Right.
I would want, so I try to determine, and I think businesses should do this ongoing, is what are the outcomes that are wanted? What is the behavior change? And then let's build an experience around creating that, those outcomes. And if you have in-person training, whether it's physically in person or not, there's going to be dialogue. The purpose of in-person and a lot of the benefits from an in-person is socialization. We need to communicate in dialogue and in conversation and storytelling to really learn from this, right? So, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, does that, do you find there's a really big difference in those choices from, let's just say, the higher ed universe versus the corporate universe versus K through 12? Like, are we making very, very different decisions all the time about those different types of things? Is it, or?
I think, ultimately everybody has their own opinion as to what works best, but I've taught in the public school system. I taught junior high Spanish, and I've taught adults in adult learning in businesses. And there's not a lot of difference, to be honest. Attention spans are about the same. Maturity levels are about the same. And, and truthfully, like, it's not that much different. Adults have less patience and they're more independent. So they're actually harder to train than most younger people because they have more experience and they're more independent.
And they come with, I would assume they come with a lot of biases and preconceived notions as well, right? Sure.
Definitely. They're way less open to new ideas, right? In general. Now, this is obviously a big generalization, but I think that the modalities fit either way. If I'm in so when I did teach Spanish, there were moments where I wanted the students to do self-paced learning. So we used an application called Duolingo that they could practice individual skills and language skills on their own. And then we would do moments where we were discussing as a group and conversing in Spanish, right? But I tried never to do the same modality all the way through a training. So we hear this term blended learning a lot. And I don't know that everybody knows what it means or uses it the same way. The way I think of blended learning is truly mixing up the ways you deliver content and training. So a variety of options to deliver training, because everybody learns differently. If we stick to only one method, we're really missing most of the audience. And for most people, my preference is actually a mixture. It's not just I have 100% preference here. I have like a big, spattering of different preferences that I like to learn. And so as facilitators, we should be trying to gauge the audience and adjust our teaching styles to the preferences and the learning preferences of our audiences. And then of course, in the business world, you have to do that based on like logistics. Where are people located? What kind of equipment do they have? Does everybody have access to a device where they can join a virtual conference? If we're too spread out, like how often can we actually get together in one physical place that's economically feasible, right? So there's a lot of determinations. And what I came to the conclusion is that at the beginning of the right before the pandemic hit, I was in a sales training for a new company, and the model was very outdated. They had everybody fly into one hotel for 3 days straight, and it was 8 to 8. It wasn't even like 8 to 5. It was 8 to 8, 3 days straight. Everybody in this room, and honestly, it was miserable for me. It was not a good experience.
I want to pause it. Like, so here we are 20 months later, right? You said that was right before the pandemic. And in my universe, okay, unless I'm learning, like I could see where those moments are. You have to learn how to fix a car at some point, right? Like, and you're going to have to get your hands on the car, right? Like if you're going to do surgery, you probably want to have in-person. And obviously there's lots and lots of different, this has to be done physical.
Without a doubt.
But even the idea of the 8 to 8 training, you know what I mean? Like so going back to those moments where it has to be physical, we have now upended. The data is so there that that just is, it's ineffective at the end of the day. Are you seeing that when you talk to clients or when you talk to, prospects or when you're talking about, talking to others about actually building out these strategies? Has that sunk in with the learning universe overall? And I think more importantly with sort of like the management universe, right? Like I'm thinking of the dean level and above, the provost, and also, sort of that, manager to vice president to C-suite, like where they're just like, hey, let's get this training. I'm just going to stop. What do you think?
It's a good question. I think most practitioners understand that training and learning is not an event. It's this process, right? Like everybody's like, oh, training happened. It's done. Now you're trained. Like that's not how it works. That's why schools, we have like 4-year universities and we have classes that span a whole semester, because you can't just plan 8 hours of training for a week and expect everybody to be equipped and ready to go on their job. That's not how learning works. Humans we don't learn that way. And so I think most practitioners that I meet with understand that learning is a process, and there's this continuum of learning that we all experience. And there's multiple ways we learn. We learn from watching, we learn from observing, we learn from hands-on experience, we learn from listening, we learn from reading. There's so many, and
one that I've always found is like how important reflection is, like just even like I know for myself as well, the aha moment that you have, like, a week later when you're kind of mulling things over and you just kind of let the marbles roll around in your head and you just kind of have that moment where you're like, oh, I see how it fits, or, or you're in the moment, you're in the sales process or you're in the management process or you're in whatever. And you're like, wow, okay, that part actually fits right there. I get it now.
Yeah.
Those are really interesting moments.
And a lot of times that doesn't occur on your own. In my experience, like, yes, I've had epiphanies and aha moments alone, but almost always they happen with a group of people as somebody else is sharing what they've learned or observing something else. And then it's like, oh, you just explained something that I've been trying to figure out. You know what I mean? Yeah. So there is like the social learning construct is so critical to, again, like self-paced learning is great, but I think in order to solidify those concepts and have those aha moments where learning is truly ingrained in somebody's mind and body, it requires more collaboration with other people, especially those who have had experiences doing it, right? That's why you have, my wife's a nurse, right? And in the medical field, you have practicums and you have hands-on experience. You learn medical jargon and vocabulary and concepts, case studies, but then actually where the rubber meets the road is when they actually start drawing blood and taking tests and meeting with patients, and really all of that learning kind of solidifies in this big circle, right? It's like all those things that I've been learning for the past year or two, or 7, 8 years, depending on how long you're in school, they're actually starting to become real and applicable, as opposed to just a theory or a concept or a principle. And corporate learning is not any different. We need a lot of that experience hands-on or with other people to solidify the things that we've learned. and to really like put them into practice. So
yeah. So no. What do I want to ask next? What I want to ask next is about, do we even care? Of course we do. That's not the right question. I apologize to all the listeners. It's not about do we care, but we have spent a lot of time on this podcast. I have held an entire event on student engagement, right? Like in 2021, our April event, the eLearn Success Summit, was on improving learner engagement. But we know that engagement doesn't even necessarily happen in the in-person context as well.
Exactly.
So again, is this just a lesson that the teaching profession or the instructor, the training profession hasn't heard, and it's really individual personality driven, or like what can be done to make the experience more engaging, or the learning experience more engaging? Or is it just, again, is it that coming together of a constellation of personality and preparation and these kinds of things, and it's just we need to be intentional about it?
I think the intentional is right. I think that's the key. What happens a lot of times, and part of the reason virtual learning gets a bad rap, is because there's poor design and poor execution. It's usually not the technology that they're using that's the problem. It's almost always the strategy and the solutions that were designed by people that were like, no, those weren't good solutions. And the reason I point that out is like, training can be miserable in person or virtual.
Oh, I was just going to say, everything that you just described, right? I have seen horrific in-person training.
Terrible.
I mean, there's a reason why the death by PowerPoint,
that became a thing, because college professors like, oh, look at this cool tool. I can just talk the whole time and show pictures. And forever, like when I was in college, I'm like, I will never, ever use PowerPoint. Like that was like, I hated. But it wasn't because the tool is bad. It's because the design was terrible.
Right.
Like a lecture for hours and hours, it's not effective. And It doesn't matter if you could be the most engaging speaker in the world, and at some point, people's attention just
you'll lose your audience. At some point, you'll lose your audience. Yeah.
It doesn't matter who it is. That's why comedians, good comedians, they like quit when they're ahead, right? Because they know like at some point this is going to go downhill, and it goes downhill fast. So when you're in the lead, you just jump, like leave people hungry for more. Like when they're laughing the hardest, that's when you bolt, even though you have more material, like end it. So my opinion of overall, like what's better, virtual and in person, that's not the right question. The right question is, what's the best strategy for delivering this content? And that could work in person or virtually. My experience in virtual learning is that I've had some excellent virtual training sessions, completely fantastic learning sessions in a remote setting where everybody's in their own spot. But it was because the facilitator was great and their learning design was excellent. And I've also had that in person, but I've had the flip. So ultimately, like I'll say to people all the time, just because we're not in person, it doesn't mean it's a lesser than experience. And just because we are in person, it doesn't mean that it's an enhanced training. Those don't always happen. I've had miserable in-person training and experiences where I fall asleep because I'm so bored. And I've had others where I'm on my feet and I'm learning and I'm engaging with an audience. And I've done the same in a virtual setting. So it's not mutually exclusive to one format.
So where do we, where do we go next in terms of this evolution? You are a part of a new company that is, there is this platform, Zoom, obviously, we all know the Cinderella story of Zoom and how it kind of took off, and obviously riding that wave and building this platform out for yourself. Where do we go in terms of convincing leaders that having these right tools and resources, to create effective virtual learning? Like, what are you putting on the table for them to say, look, here's how I change your mind, or here's how we do it differently? I know do we have to assume it's going to be painful, or like what's your process for that?
So because of COVID, every company has been forced to be remote, and they've had to figure out a way to communicate remotely. Now, many companies have been doing this for years. We've had remote workers for a long time, right?
I've been doing it for 17 years, my friend.
17 years yourself, right? So this is not a new concept. What I think is new for some leaders is the fact that if I can't see my employees all the time in an office, in their seats at their desks, I don't know if they're working or not.
Mm-hmm.
And some trainers have that same issue. Like if I can't see what they're doing in front of me, I don't know if they're learning. There's this kind of trepidation or fear that if we can't control the surroundings and control everything, like we're losing it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what's happened during the pandemic is leaders are seeing like, hang on a minute. We've been remote here for a year, 2 years now, and we're communicating effectively. Our business hasn't shut down. We're still functioning. We're actually, in many cases, like our revenues are going up.
Sure, we're more profitable. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And not to mention, some of the statistics I've cited in some of these presentations I do, employees are actually more satisfied having a work from home experience, or at least a hybrid flexible work situation where maybe I need to work out of the office sometimes or from home, or I have more options. There's flexibility, and employees are happier in many instances. It's not like we're not seeing this trend that says everybody wants to work from home or everybody wants to work from the office. What we're seeing more than anything is that people value flexibility and options, and companies are adopting that. So that's why we see companies like Salesforce and massive, tech companies saying, Google, I think, and they're like, hey, working in the office, optional from now on.
Mm-hmm.
What? That's never been done before from these large companies. It's revolutionary. And it's because leaders are realizing we can get a lot of work done even when we're not all in one physical place. And many of these same leaders have been in training sessions in Zoom or Teams or whatever, and they're like, actually, this can work.
Mm-hmm.
This can be successful.
100%.
And so we play on that. We say, look, virtual is a reality and it's not going away. You're still going to have opportunities for in-person training. And when you need them, great. But businesses realize like that can be costly to do all the time. Mm-hmm. If you have, I was speaking to a lady from FedEx. She's kind of runs Latin American operations, right? And so all of their people are spread out in multiple different countries. And she said, we used to try to do quarterly, like everybody in one place. And it was so costly to fly everybody in and accommodate everybody.
I can only imagine.
So they changed it to try to do once a year. And we were talking about this strategy. Why is that a good idea? And then what should we do during those sessions when we're only in person, connected once a year? And my opinion is you should socialize.
Yeah.
That you should spend that time getting to know people, team building, because when you're in person, it's easier to break down those barriers of like, I don't know you very well. I want to get to know you. It's a little bit, I still think that has, advantages that we don't see fully in the virtual setting.
We've heard it from other speakers as well. It's really interesting. We're having a guest that's coming up on the podcast in the near future as well. So there's kind of two. We have Britt Andrietta and another gentleman who's coming up that talk about Britt. the physical nature. I mean, we are, physical humans. We are these animals, and we communicate through these nonverbal communication. We have even like our pheromones play with one another. We actually have like this gentleman was telling me, and I apologize, I'm completely blanking on his name right now. He's going to kill me. But he was even telling me the brain science shows that when you and I are in a conversation, that they can measure that our brain recognizes the air pressure difference that happens when I take a pause. And that's how I know to engage the conversation. It doesn't happen virtually like we did. Even though you and I, you can kind of feel the cadence of the conversation. He said that really, it has a physical effect. And so I completely agree with you that these in-person opportunities that we have should be to be human, like really just sort of be social. I'm wondering how much the introvert, community right now is screaming, but at the end of the day, inside, of course, screaming inside.
Yeah.
But
yes, of course, they would never let you know that. I completely agree. I think, use those if your in-person communication opportunities are sparing and you don't have a ton, then use that time for team building and getting to know people and building strong bonds of trust and communication that can then be you can enhance those over time because if you and I sit down in person, we go to lunch, we go to an activity, we do something, go to a game or whatever. And then the next time I see you in a virtual setting, I'm like, hey, Steven, how's it going? It was so fun. We have a different level of connection and trust and a bond. And so I'm always encouraging, I think we should have in-person events when you can. Our company is 100% remote.
Mm-hmm.
So there's many people in my company I've never met face-to-face. Most of them I haven't.
Mm-hmm.
And so my idea of getting together it's because I want to build those team bonds and strong relationships that you can do in an office setting a little bit easier, right? When you're seeing everybody every day in an office, you have moments to sit down at lunch or walk by their desk and chat. And that doesn't happen as often when you're remote. So use the in-person time as best as possible to really create bonds and connection, so that when you're not in person and we have to do a virtual, that it could be a stronger connection between your peers and your colleagues. So that's typically what I recommend.
Yeah, I think we need to figure out if there is a science of shared experience, right? This is how I characterize it. And because what you've just described is, this is why people who go through a war together end up having incredibly tight bonds, because of this shared experience that they can't quite explain to anybody else, right? Or people who go on a vacation together, suddenly you've got that thing, not that reference point, but it's that shared experience. And it really matters whether or not it's whether or not it's in person or virtual, because that in-person moment, that type, you taste it, it's all of the sensory components are there that you can then reference later. And especially when you really connect with somebody in one of those shared experiences, that's when that's when those relationships go to the next level. Very interesting.
Completely. Well, and that's the funny thing. A lot of people see me, I work for a software company. So they're like, oh, you just want to sell software. And it's like, no, I don't think software is going to solve your problems. In fact, I tell people that all the time in my presentations, software is not going to solve your problems.
Yeah.
So, it sounds really counterintuitive from a software person to say, yeah, this is going to fix everything. I value in person, physical, present. I love it. I'm an extrovert, and I've noticed more than anybody during COVID how much I need that, how much I rely on communicating and connecting with people in person and physically present. But in lieu of that, when that's not an option all the time, or if you can spread it out and make it more valuable when it happens, we're just supplementing those experiences with this virtual software and conferencing. So I don't see in-person training as a threat to virtual training, or vice versa. I don't think that e-learning is a threat to live facilitated courses. I believe there's a purpose and a place for all of it. Mm-hmm. And that's what it comes back to, really understanding what outcomes do you want to drive and what's the best modality to train that particular piece of material. Mm-hmm. And if we do that, then there's no threat here. All of these learning modalities are valuable, but if you only focus on one, we're neglecting it. It's really like having a healthy diet. I'm not a nutritionist by any means, but we should consider learning as a balanced diet. There are multiple food groups that we need to consume and training modalities that we should all include in a balanced, healthy diet of learning. So
on that note, I'm going to ask you my last question that I ask everybody on the podcast here, which is, what do you, somebody who works for essentially a startup, what are you excited about for the next, let's call it 12 to 18 months? Is there a shiny new object? Is there a process? Is there an event? Is there a thing that you're like, this is going to be super cool here in 2022, or maybe over that horizon a little bit?
I have to put some thought into that. Based on the last 2 years, it's really hard to predict, what's coming. I don't think anybody had real clue of how this was going to affect the world and how it's continued to affect the world. I think for me personally, I'm excited to just watch my kids grow up and be a part of their lives. Being remote and employer working from home has really given me an opportunity to spend more time with my children.
Oh yeah.
And my wife, and we got a dog for Christmas. So now it's like, so there are so many benefits. And I've just enjoyed seeing, I get to take them to school. I get to, sometimes we eat lunches together if they stay home, or I go on a date with my wife for lunch. Like those types of things just never existed in my life previously. And it's brought me a lot of joy. So that's personally, I'll share that. I find that really exciting. On the prospect of learning and the future of, our world, I guess, or exciting events. I love when I'm working with clients and they see the potential of their learning programs as we discuss new ideas and new concepts, and you see this kind of new light in their eyes and excitement for work and excitement for strategy and design. When I get to watch that and witness that, it's actually extremely satisfying for me. And so it's not like one event necessarily or one big thing. So many people predict like, oh, this technology is going to change learning, LXPs and gamification and all. Like, I don't buy it. They're all built out for a reason. They're all helpful. But what is the most exciting is watching people devise excellent strategies for their teams, and being a part of that, to be a witness of it or a consultant to it, is just extremely fun. I love coaching. I'm just a coach and a teacher by nature. And so, facilitating that experience and that aha moment for people in their organization, it's just so exciting. So class, unfortunately for me, class has brought me many of those experiences. Over the last year, I've just been able to meet with people and share with them our platform and the solutions that we can help them devise. And they get excited. So it just pumps me up.
Super cool. Ben, this has been an energizing conversation. I absolutely loved it. I hope that we will have a chance to connect again in the near future, but I wish you all the best. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. It's been fun. Thanks.
Thanks again for tuning into today's episode of the eLearning Podcast. If you like what you heard, please do me the favor of following us on LinkedIn, Twitter, or whichever social media you prefer. Also, if you're interested in diving deeper on e-learning, I encourage you to get your free ticket to the eLearning Success Summit, where there are more than 70 hours of presentations on best practices. Just go to elearningsuccesssummit.com. And then finally, for the latest news, information, and resources about e-learning, come subscribe to our newsletter at lmspulse.com. Thanks.